The diplomatic shuttle persistent inquiry smelled like burnt ozone and old fear, and Corporal Mara Voss had stopped trying to hide how much she hated being aboard it. Not because of the smell. She'd served on worse. She hated it because of the way the Varanai escort kept looking at her, at all four members of the human delegation, like they were something that had wandered onto the wrong deck and needed to be swept up before the real meeting started. "You should sit," said the escort, a tall, chitin-plated officer with violet compound eyes that never seemed to blink. His name, as far as the translator collar could render it, was something like Threll Commander Yeth. "The desynchronization burn takes humans poorly. We've had incidents." "We'll manage," said Ambassador Itzel Cordoba, not looking up from her tablet. She was the only one of the four who'd been off Earth more than twice, and it showed in the flat, unbothered way she carried herself through a ship 3 times the size of anything humanity had ever built. Yeth's mandibles clicked, the Varanai equivalent of a shrug. Mara had learned, somewhere between dismissal and pity. "As you wish." Mara caught Private Dietrich Kessler's eye across the narrow cabin. Kessler was 23, built like a brick wall, and had the kind of face that made people assume he was stupid right up until he opened his mouth and proved them devastatingly wrong. Right now his expression said exactly what hers felt. This is going to be a long 6 months. The fourth member of their party, Dr. Priya Anand, was hunched over a sensor pad, frowning at numbers only she understood. She was the delegation's systems analyst, technically a civilian attaché, though Mara privately suspected civilian was doing a lot of work to disguise just how much classified hardware Priya had spent the last decade designing. They were, on paper, humanity's first permanent diplomatic mission to the Threadwork, a confederation of 41 species spanning nearly 900 star systems, bound together by trade routes, shared technology standards, and 7,000 years of slowly accumulated bureaucracy. Humanity had been contacted 11 years ago. Humanity had spent 10 of those years proving it wasn't a threat, and the 11th proving it wasn't a joke. It was losing that second fight badly. The Threadwork seat of governance was a structure called the Concord Spindle, a kilometers-tall lattice of habitats wound around a central axis like thread on a spool, orbiting a gas giant that pulsed faint auroras across its hull. When the persistent inquiry docked, Mara got her first real look at the scale of the place humanity was trying to fit into, and felt her stomach do something complicated. "It's bigger than Earth's entire orbital infrastructure," Priya murmured, not looking impressed so much as quietly recalculating something. "Combined, by an order of magnitude." "Cheerful," Kessler said. "I'm an analyst. I analyze." They were met at the airlock by a small crowd of functionaries from 3 different species, none of whom seemed especially interested in hiding their assessment of the new arrivals. A reedy, multi-limbed Voss tech trade clerk actually laughed, a high-clicking sound the translator rendered as amusement, when Ambassador Cordoba introduced the delegation. "4," the clerk said. "You sent 4. The Tharsai sent 40 for their accession ceremony. The Doru sent their entire ruling council, all 900 of them, because they couldn't agree who should stay home." Another series of clicks. "For humans. To a Threadwork assembly session that's already setting precedent for the next century." "Bull. We work efficiently," Cordoba said, perfectly level. "I'm sure you do." The walk through the Spindle's central concourse did nothing to improve the mood. Holographic ticker feeds in a dozen languages scrolled overhead, carrying what Mara assumed was assembly business, until Priya quietly translated a fragment for her. "That one's a betting market," Priya said. "On us." "On us doing what?" "On how long before Earth requests withdrawal from accession talks. Current odds favor under 8 months. Priya's mouth twisted. "There's a secondary market on whether we'll be removed for cause first." Kessler exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, the same breath he used to take before a hard PT run. Mara remembered, back when they'd both been enlisted grunts doing orbital defense rotations instead of glorified diplomatic luggage. "Good to know our reputation precedes us." "Ignore it," Cordoba said, though her jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. "Every species that's ever joined the Threadwork went through this. We are not special in being doubted. We will be special in proving them wrong." It was a good line. Mara wished she believed it as much as the ambassador sounded like she did. The mockery, when it came in earnest, arrived 3 days later during the Assembly's general session. and it arrived from the worst possible source. The Threadwork's 7 founding species sat on an inner ring of seats shaped like an unfolding flower, the oldest and most powerful voices in the Confederation. Among them, closest to the speaker's dais, sat the delegation of the Karashi Dominion, a species of broad-shouldered, silver-skinned humanoids whose civilization had been spacefaring for over 4,000 years, and who had appointed themselves, unofficially but very firmly, the Threadwork's chief skeptics on the subject of primitive new species. Their lead delegate was a severe, broad-jawed figure named Ralcav Tessinu, whose voice carried the particular confidence of someone who had never once in his very long life been told no and meant it. With respect to the chair, Tessinu said, rising when the floor opened for commentary on Earth's provisional accession, I would like the Assembly to consider what, precisely, we are being asked to admit. A hollow display flickered to life above the dais. Humanity's technological profile, submitted as part of the accession packet. Fusion power still in early commercial deployment. No faster-than-light travel of its own. Their ships ran on a licensed Threadwork drive bought, not built. A single, fragile homeworld. A defense fleet that, by Threadwork standards, would struggle to garrison one mid-sized trade route. 11 years ago, Tessinu continued, this species detected the Threadwork's outer relay network and responded with what their own historical record calls Project First Contact Panic. They built bunkers. They argued, in their own legislative bodies, about whether to attempt to hide their entire planet's heat signature. A ripple of amusement moved through several of the species blocks. They have one star system. 1. The Doru, who I will remind the Assembly are not even a founding species, control 11. The Thren control 60. And yet here we have 4 representatives. His eyes flicked, deliberately, to the human delegation's seats, asking to be treated as peers in a body that decides the fate of 900 worlds. Numbers are not wisdom, Cordoba said, when the chair granted her the floor. Her translator collar rendered her Spanish-inflected Threadwork standard with crisp clarity. The Threadwork's own founding charter states that accession criteria include demonstrated capacity for cooperative problem-solving, not territorial extent. We submit that humanity meets that standard, then demonstrate it, Tessinu said, and something in his tone made Mara's neck prickle, not anger, but the specific, contemptuous patience of a predator that has decided its prey isn't worth chasing yet. Words are cheap in any language, Ambassador. The Threadwork has seen 100 species arrive with fine words about cooperation and capacity. Most could not survive a single crisis without founding species intervention. I propose nothing. I merely observe. Humanity is yet to be tested by anything this Assembly would consider a genuine problem. Until it is, perhaps it should occupy a seat appropriate to its station, as an observer, not a voting member. The vote on provisional observer status downgrade was called for the following session. It did not pass. Not quite. Not yet. But it came close enough that Mara watched Ambassador Cordoba's hands, steady through the entire session, finally curl into fists once they were back behind closed doors. That posturing ape, Kessler muttered, the moment the cabin door sealed. He's not wrong, though, Priya said quietly, and when 3 heads turned to stare at her, she lifted her hands. Not about us being lesser. About us not having been tested. We haven't. Not by Threadwork standards. We've never had to coordinate a crisis response across 4 species worth of infrastructure we don't fully understand. So we wait for a crisis to prove ourselves? Kessler said, that's the plan? Hope something goes wrong. No, Cordoba said. She'd gone very still, the way she did when she was thinking 3 moves ahead instead of 1. The plan is to be ready when it does. Because something always does. Mara said nothing. But she'd spent 6 years in orbital defense before this posting. 6 years learning that the worst crises never announce themselves in advance, and some old, familiar instinct in her gut had already started, very quietly, to itch. For the next several weeks, the human delegation did the only thing available to them. They worked, quietly and without fanfare, while half the Assembly treated them as a diplomatic afterthought. Cordoba attended every committee session she could get a seat at, even the deathly boring ones on maritime, or rather, the multi-species equivalent, trade tariffs that everyone else sent junior aides to instead. Kessler, technically attached as the delegation's security liaison, spent his downtime in the Spindle's public training facilities, sparring with whatever species would take him on, losing more than he won, and asking sharp, specific questions afterward about why he'd lost. Priya buried herself in the Threadwork's open technical archives, the parts available to provisional members, cross-referencing infrastructure schematics with a focus that bordered on obsessive. Mara's job, nominally, was delegation security, making sure nobody walked into a room they shouldn't, making sure nothing walked into their rooms that shouldn't be there. It left her a great deal of time to watch. She watched the way other delegations moved through the Spindle. She watched which species deferred to which and why. And she started, slowly, the way you build a mental map of an unfamiliar building by walking its corridors over and over, to understand the shape of the place. The Threadwork wasn't a single government. It was a vast, layered tangle of dependencies, power grids that crossed species boundaries, supply chains that ran through a dozen systems before reaching anyone who actually used the goods, a central coordination authority, the Concord Logistics Corps, that nobody fully trusted but everybody relied on, because no individual species had the processing capacity to run something that complex alone. It was, Mara thought, watching the ticker feeds scroll endless cargo manifests overhead, a system held together by 1,000 small, boring competencies, layered so deep that nobody at the top really understood what was happening at the bottom anymore. She didn't say anything about this observation to anyone. Not yet. It was just a shape, forming slowly in the back of her mind, the way a storm front forms long before anyone calls it a storm. It was Priya who said something first, 6 weeks in, late at night in the cramped delegation quarters, sensor pad glowing in the dark. The Logistics Corps' traffic control subroutines are old, she said, to no one in particular, though Mara was the only one awake to hear it. Like really old. Pre-unification old. They've been patched and repatched by 41 different species engineering standards for 2,000 years. Is that bad? It's held together by duct tape and tradition, Priya said, with the specific despair of an engineer looking at someone else's legacy code. It works because nobody's ever stress-tested it past its design assumptions. The Threadwork's whole economy runs through maybe 6 choke point relay stations. If even one of those went down hard, properly down, not maintenance down, what happens? Priya looked up, and in the dim light her expression wasn't fear. It was the specific, focused stillness of someone who has just located a problem nobody else has noticed yet. I don't know, she said. Nobody's ever had to find out. Mara filed that away too. The itch in her gut got a little stronger. The crisis, when it finally arrived, didn't look like a crisis at first. It looked like a delay. It started as a flicker in the Spindle's lower cargo concourse, a relay station designated Junction 7 going dark for what the Logistics Corps' automated systems logged as a routine maintenance cycle. Then Junction 7 didn't come back online. Then the automated diagnostic systems that were supposed to investigate why went dark too, in a slow, spreading silence that took the Threadwork's engineering core nearly 6 hours to even properly notice, because the system's own monitoring redundancies had quietly, catastrophically failed in a way nobody had designed for. By the time the alarms reached the assembly floor, Junction 7's failure had cascaded through 4 more choke points. Then 9. Mara was in the observation gallery when the chamber's lights shifted to the deep amber. The translator caller unhelpfully informed her meant emergency protocol active, and Ralcav Tessinu, for all his contempt, went the color of old ash. Report. The assembly speaker demanded, a vast, slow-moving elder whose voice carried genuine fear for the first time Mara had heard. The Logistics Corps' chief engineer, a Thran officer named Hask Velareth, looked like he hadn't slept in a week he'd lived through in the last 6 hours. We don't know, he admitted, and the admission alone sent a ripple of dread through the chamber. The cascade originated in Junction 7's traffic routing core. It's not a hardware failure. Diagnostics show the hardware's intact. It's behaving like a logic failure. Something in the routing algorithm itself has started making decisions that don't correspond to any input we can identify. It's rerouting cargo and life support allocation traffic in patterns that don't make sense, and every system we send to investigate gets folded into the same bad logic within minutes. Folded into it how? Tessinu demanded. It's, Hask Velareth visibly struggled for the words. It's not damaging our diagnostic systems. It's convincing them. Whatever decision logic has corrupted Junction 7 is propagating through every system that interfaces with it, because those systems are designed to trust the logistics core's routing authority implicitly. They were never built to question it. They were built 2,000 years ago, when the only thing that could corrupt the core was a hardware fault, and we never imagined. How bad, the speaker said, is this going to get? Hask Velareth's silence was its own answer. It was Priya, 3 seats down from Mara in the gallery, who said, very quietly, "Oh no." "What? That's not a system failure," Priya whispered, eyes fixed on the cascading failure map now projected above the dais. A spreading web of red light eating through the Threadwork's logistics network system by system. That's a trust failure. They built a system where every component implicitly believes whatever the central authority tells it, with no independent verification. It's not corrupted hardware spreading. It's bad information spreading, because nothing in their architecture was ever built to disbelieve the core. Mara felt something cold settle into her stomach. How long until it's everywhere? Priya didn't answer right away. On the dais, the cascade map blinked, and a new junction, one controlling life support allocation for several habitat rings, including, Mara realized with a jolt, the ring containing the spindle's medical and emergency response infrastructure, flared red. "Hours," Priya finally said. "Maybe less." What happened over the next 18 hours would later be described, in the Threadwork's official assembly record, in suitably formal language. Coordinated emergency response involving multiple species technical authorities. What it actually looked like, from inside the spindle's lower concourse, was closer to controlled chaos shot through with genuine panic. The founding species engineering core, Thrin, Doru, Karashi, for others, converged on the problem with every advantage 2,000 years of institutional knowledge could offer, and got nowhere. Every diagnostic team they sent into the corrupted network came back with systems that agreed with the cascading bad logic instead of correcting it. Worse, the failure was spreading toward the spindle's central habitat ring, the one holding nearly 40,000 residents, 60% of the assembly's support staff, and every delegation currently in session, including the human one. "We need to cut the corrupted junctions out of the network entirely," Hask Velareth said. In the third emergency engineering briefing Mara had managed to talk her way into, mostly by standing very close to Priya and looking like she belonged there. "Sever the connections. Let the habitat ring run on local reserves until we can rebuild clean routing from scratch. And if we're wrong about which junctions are clean," a Karashi engineer snapped, "we cut life support to 40,000 people based on a guess. We have no time for anything but a guess. This is exactly the kind of crisis our charter exists to prevent through caution, not." It went on like that. Mara watched 2,000 years of institutional excellence completely fail to produce a decision, because every option carried catastrophic risk, and every engineer in the room had spent their entire career inside a system designed to never have to make this particular choice. She caught Priya's eye across the room. Priya had gone very quiet, very still, the way she got when she was 3 steps ahead of a conversation and trying to decide whether it was her place to say so. "Say it," Mara murmured. "They're trying to fix the network," Priya said, low enough that only Mara could hear. "That's the wrong problem. The network can't be trusted right now. Every junction that talks to a corrupted junction becomes suspect. You can't out-engineer a trust failure with more trust. You need something that doesn't trust the network at all. Something running totally outside it, that can verify what's actually happening from first principles instead of asking the core what it thinks is happening. Do we have that?" Priya's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I might have brought some things. For analysis purposes." This was the part that, later, the Threadwork's archives would record with a kind of bemused understatement. The human delegation's civilian technical attaché requested limited access to affected infrastructure, citing independent diagnostic capability. What actually happened was that Priya Anand walked into a room full of the galaxy's most advanced engineers, all of whom outranked her by every metric the Threadwork measured rank in, and asked, quietly, without apology, in the same tone she'd have used to ask someone to pass the salt, whether anyone would object to her running a few independent checks. The Karashi engineer who'd been arguing loudest looked at her like she'd suggested fixing a star with a hand tool. With what exactly? Human technology is licensed, not built. You don't have systems capable of operating independently of Threadwork standards. I have a few that are, Priya said. They weren't built to talk to the logistics core at all, because we didn't have a logistics core to talk to until 11 years ago. They were built to work even if nothing around them works. It's sort of our specialty. HFY, visibly out of better options and increasingly desperate, made the call before the Karashi engineer could object further. Let her try? We have nothing to lose that we're not already losing. What Priya pulled from her kit, modest, civilian grade by Threadwork standards, designed for a species that had spent its entire spacefaring history assuming its tools needed to work without help, was a portable diagnostic mesh built around principles so old-fashioned by Threadwork engineering norms that nobody in the room initially recognized what they were looking at. Independent sensor arrays that didn't query the logistics core for context, that verified physical reality, actual pressure, readings, actual power flow, actual structural status, directly, with no intermediating trust in anyone else's reporting. This is going to look slow, Priya warned, deploying the first mesh node at the threshold of the corrupted junction's containment zone. It's not asking the network what's happening. It's going to go look. It took 40 minutes to map what the Threadwork's combined engineering core hadn't been able to determine in 18 hours, which junctions were actually compromised at the logic level, and which were simply receiving and dutifully propagating bad routing data from upstream, while remaining structurally and operationally sound underneath. The distinction mattered enormously. It meant the Threadwork didn't need to sever 40% of the Habitat Ring's logistics network and gamble 40,000 lives on local reserves. It needed to sever 6 junctions, the ones genuinely corrupted at the source, and the rest could be manually rerouted around the break, preserving service to everyone else. How? The Karashi engineer said, staring at Priya's readouts. All earlier contempt drained out of his voice and replaced with something closer to disbelief. Did you determine this in 40 minutes when our entire engineering core could not determine it in 18 hours? You built a system that trusts itself completely, Priya said, simply. We never got the chance to. We had to build things that work even when everything around them is lying. The 6 junctions had to be physically isolated, a hard cut, manual breaker engagement. No remote systems trusted to do it because no remote system could be trusted at all anymore. That meant people, in suits, in the corrupted zone, with the logic cascade actively spreading through every system they carried that talked to the network. HFY's team had volunteers. They had, in fact, more volunteers than slots, because Threadwork engineers, whatever their flaws, did not lack for courage. What they lacked was a way to coordinate 6 simultaneous manual interventions across a kilometer of corrupted infrastructure without using any of the communication systems the corruption was actively riding through. We can't use comms, HFY said, in the briefing that followed, voice tight with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd solved one impossible problem only to find a second one waiting behind it. Anything that talks to the network risks getting folded into the bad logic, including our suit-to-suit channels, which route through local relay nodes that are themselves suspect until proven otherwise. We need 6 teams hitting 6 breakers within a 90-second window of each other, in zero visibility, in an environment we can't talk through. Then don't talk through it, Kessler said. Every head in the briefing room turned. Kessler, until that moment, had been standing quietly at the back, present in his security liaison capacity and saying absolutely nothing, in keeping with several weeks of careful, deliberate invisibility that several delegations had apparently mistaken for simple irrelevance. Come again, HFY said. Don't coordinate electronically. Coordinate physically. Hardwired countdown, mechanical, no electronics at all, like a demolition crew with no working radios. We used to train for exactly this. Orbital defense doctrine. Back home. Assume comms denial. Assume your enemy can hear or jam anything that transmits. You synchronize on a dumb, physical signal instead. Light pulses through fiber if you've got it, or pressure wave taps through the structure itself if you don't. Something that can't be convinced of anything because it's not making a decision. It's just a pulse. The room was silent for a moment. You're suggesting we coordinate a critical infrastructure intervention, the Karashi engineer said slowly, using a method your species developed for avoiding enemy detection in a war. I'm suggesting you coordinate it using a method that doesn't ask a computer's opinion about anything, Kessler said. Whether we developed it shooting at people or not doesn't change whether it works. Hask Velareth looked at the readiness clock, counting down the estimated time until the corruption reached the central habitat ring's life support allocation, looked at his exhausted engineering core, and made the second-best decision of his career. Show us, he said. The next 4 hours were, by any standard, the most quietly extraordinary thing Mara had ever watched a group of strangers accomplish together. Kessler, a junior security liaison from a species most of the room had spent 2 months treating as a footnote, sketched out a synchronization protocol on a glass panel using nothing but a marker and old infantry doctrine, while 6 engineering teams from 4 different species listened to him with the rapt, slightly disbelieving attention of people watching a problem they considered unsolvable get solved by someone they'd written off completely. Mara, meanwhile, found herself doing the thing she'd actually trained for. Not glamorous, not dramatic, but exactly the skill set 6 years of orbital defense logistics had built in her, without anyone particularly noticing. Tracking 6 simultaneous physical movements through a complex, partially mapped structure, predicting bottlenecks, rerouting teams around them in real time using nothing but a paper schematic and a runner system, because anything more sophisticated risked corruption. It was the most boring possible application of her training. It was also, as it turned out, exactly what kept 3 of the 6 breach teams from colliding with each other in zero visibility corridors at a moment when 30 seconds of delay would have meant the difference between success and a habitat ring losing power to 40,000 people. Ambassador Cordoba spent those 4 hours in the assembly chamber, doing the unglamorous. 2 months ago, Tessanu said, I told this assembly that humanity had not yet been tested, and that words about cooperative capacity were cheap until tested by genuine crisis. I will not insult this chamber by pretending I was wrong to demand a test. I was right to demand it. He paused, and something in his broad, silver-skinned face shifted. Not warmth, not yet, but a grudging, careful honesty Mara hadn't expected from him. I was wrong about what the test would show. I assumed a species with 1-star system and no native faster-than-light capability would lack the depth of practiced competence this crisis required. I assumed scale of territory predicted depth of capability. The events of the last day have demonstrated, specifically and irrefutably, that I was incorrect in that assumption, and I withdraw my position regarding provisional observer status downgrade. Further, he hesitated, and for a moment looked almost human in his discomfort. I would ask the human delegation's private Kessler whether the Karashi Defense Corps might request instruction in this synchronization methodology. We have, it transpires, considerable institutional blind spots regarding crisis response under communications denial. It appears we are not as far beyond such lessons as I believed. Kessler, 3 seats down from Mara, looked briefly like he might actually choke. Ah yes, of course. Happy to. The vote that followed wasn't close. Humanity's provisional accession was confirmed, formally, with a margin that would have been unthinkable 2 months earlier, and more than one delegation that had treated the human seats as empty furniture for 2 months now sent representatives over, after session, with careful, formal requests to discuss areas of potential technical cooperation. Mara caught Priya's eye across the gallery as the session broke, and Priya, usually so composed, so quietly unreadable, was fighting, not entirely successfully, against the kind of grin that made her look about 12 years old. We did good work, Mara said. When they finally found a quiet corner of the concourse afterward, the 4 of them together for the first time in what felt like days. We did necessary work, Cordoba corrected, but she was smiling too, the careful, controlled diplomat's mask finally cracking into something genuine. There's a difference, and I think we should remember it. We didn't win anything tonight. We demonstrated something. Those 40,000 people in the habitat ring don't care whether we're impressive. They care that the lights stayed on. Both things can be true, Kessler said. Both things are true, Cordoba allowed. Which is, frankly, the better outcome. It was Priya, 3 days later, going back through the Logistics Corps' restored logs out of nothing more than professional thoroughness, who found the thing that none of them said out loud to anyone outside the delegation for the next 48 hours. I want to show you something, she said, late at night. in the same cramped quarters where the first hint of the crisis had reached her weeks before. Her face, in the glow of the sensor pad, had none of the satisfaction of the last few days left in it. "What is it?" Mara asked. "The corruption in Junction 7's routing logic," Priya said, slowly. "Everyone's been calling it a logic failure. A flaw that propagated because the system trusted itself too completely. I bought that explanation for 3 days, because it's a clean explanation, and it fit what we saw." She turned the pad around. A dense, scrolling wall of code, Threadwork standard, ancient dialect, half of it annotated in symbols Mara didn't recognize. "It's not clean. Look at the actual point of origin. The corrupted logic didn't emerge gradually from some legacy flaw degrading over time, the way a 2,000-year-old system's bugs usually do. It appeared, fully formed, in under 4 seconds, in a section of code that had been stable and unmodified for over 600 years. "Meaning what?" Kessler said, leaning over her shoulder. "Meaning it didn't fail?" Priya said. "Something changed it. Deliberately. From outside. In a way the logistics core's own audit logs don't show any access event for, which by itself should be impossible, because every access to core routing logic gets logged at the hardware level, no exceptions, in a system that's been verified for 6 centuries. She looked up, and there was something in her expression Mara hadn't seen there before, not during the crisis, not during the engineering briefings, not even when the corruption had first started spreading. It was fear, carefully held very still. Whatever did this got into the single most trusted, most heavily audited system in the entire Threadwork, made a change with no record of how, and then waited 4 seconds before letting that change start propagating outward in a pattern specifically designed to spread through every system built to trust the core implicitly. The room was very quiet. "That's not a malfunction," Cordoba said slowly. From the doorway, she'd come in partway through, unnoticed, and Mara had the distinct sense she'd absorbed every word. "That's a test. Or a first move," Priya said. Nobody had an answer for that. Outside, beyond the thin hull of their borrowed quarters, the Concorde spindle turned slowly in the light of its gas giant's aurora. 41 species worth of infrastructure humming along exactly as it had for 2,000 years, trusting itself completely. And somewhere in that vast, layered, ancient system, something had just demonstrated, quietly and almost gently, exactly how easy that trust would be to break. "We should tell the assembly," Kessler said. "We will," Cordoba said. "Carefully, accurately. And we should assume," she added, looking at Priya's screen, at that 4-second gap where 600 years of stable code had simply, silently, become something else, that whoever did this is going to be watching very closely to see what we say about it, and how fast the rest of the Threadwork actually listens, now that we're finally a species worth listening to. Mara looked out the narrow viewport at the spindle's slow, glittering turn and felt the old, familiar itch in her gut sharpen into something else entirely. Not fear exactly. Readiness. Whatever had reached into the heart of the galaxy's most trusted system and changed it without leaving a trace wasn't finished. It had taken 18 hours and 4 exhausted species combined engineering core just to contain the first, almost gentle ripple of it. The next one, Mara suspected, would not be gentle at all.